At 0637, a hostile fleet gets its first warning from the wrong direction. A radar ship starts tracking one inbound problem. Seconds later, another axis lights up, then another. By the time the formation understands what is happening, the strike is no longer a sequence, it's a window. A submarine salvo is arriving off one bearing. Surface-launched weapons are closing from another. Airborne sensors are holding the picture together above the horizon. And every extra second the defenders expected to buy with layered air defense is being stripped away at once. That is what time on target really does in a naval war. Not magic, compression. The US Navy is not trying to kill a fleet one ship at a time. It's trying to collapse the enemy's reaction cycle into one short, ugly moment where too many threats appear from too many vectors at once. To understand how the Navy erases a fleet with time-on-target strikes, you have to start with the defender's problem. A modern surface action group survives by stacking reaction time. A long-range radar sees first. Combat systems classify. Command teams assign shooters. One layer throws long-range interceptors. Another layer holds medium-range shots. Then, point defense takes whatever leaks through. Electronic warfare adds noise. Decoys complicate terminal guidance. Escorts protect the high-value unit. The entire formation is built on sequence. That word matters. Sequence is survival. If incoming weapons arrive in a neat line, a competent fleet can fight through it. The first raid gets tracked. Cells open. Missiles go out. Another ship picks up the leaker. Helicopters launch. Decoys bloom. Damage control parties stand by. Even if the defender loses, he loses slowly enough to shoot back. So the attacker's real mission is not just range, it's compression. Compression of time. Compression of angles. Compression of decisions. The defending admiral needs the attack to unfold in steps. The US Navy wants the opposite. It wants the tactical picture to collapse into one short, ugly moment where too many threats appear from too many vectors at once. That is why the old image of naval warfare, one cruiser seeing another cruiser over the horizon and trading shots, is dead. A real US fleet strike would be a kill web. Scouts, relay nodes, submarines, destroyers, aircraft, and offboard sensors all working the same geometry so the shooter does not have to be the sensor, and the sensor does not have to be the shooter. Military.com described the logic behind naval integrated fire control, counter-air in blunt terms, years ago. The whole point was to break what had been a slavish relationship between the sensor and the shooter. With an E-2D Hawkeye feeding the picture and weapons like the SM-6 exploiting that shared data, ships could engage beyond their own radar horizon. That is bigger than air defense. That is the skeleton of a fleet-killing method. Because once the Navy learns to separate sensing from shooting, it stops fighting like a line of ships and starts fighting like a distributed firing network. Now, add geography. Imagine a hostile fleet trying to hold a straight approach, an island chain gap, or a sea lane junction. It's counting on dispersion. It's counting on islands, clutter, civilian traffic, weather, and the radar horizon to break up the American attack. It's counting on the fact that missiles launched from one direction can be handled by one sector at a time. That assumption gets shaky the moment the US attack plan includes submarines below the horizon, destroyers far off axis, and carrier aircraft extending the targeting picture far beyond what a single shipboard radar can see. And that is before the first launch. Phase 1. Build the scout wall before building the missile wall. A fleet is not erased by launchers alone. It's erased by seeing clearly first. The first job in a time-on-target strike is to stabilize the picture. Where is the enemy formation actually moving? Which hull is the air defense node? Which ship is the command ship? Which escort has the best radar? Which contact is real? Which contact is decoy clutter? This is where the E-2D Hawkeye matters so much. Military.com called it the plane behind the planes, the first to launch and the last to land in carrier operations. That description is dead right. The Hawkeye is not glamorous, but glamour is not the mission. The mission is to hold the air and surface picture together long enough for everyone else to make good decisions. In a real fleet strike, the Hawkeye becomes the airborne traffic cop for chaos. It stretches radar coverage beyond the horizon. It helps de-conflict friendly aircraft. It keeps track continuity when sea clutter, weather, and electronic attack start trying to turn the battle space into garbage. But the Hawkeye is not alone. A submarine may already be inside the enemy's outer screen, passively tracking screws, bearings, and formation changes. A P-8A or other theater ISR asset may be expanding the broad area picture. Carrier fighters may be pushing forward as sensor nodes, not merely bomb trucks. Surface ships may be holding emissions low while taking in data from elsewhere. This is the part casual viewers miss. The strike does not begin when the missiles leave the rail. It begins when the Americans decide the track quality is good enough to commit expensive weapons against moving ships. That standard is ruthless. Because a moving fleet is not a warehouse. It will not sit there and wait for a land attack timeline to catch up. If the targeting chain is soft, the salvo becomes a very expensive demonstration of confidence rather than a kill. So Phase 1 is about certainty, not absolute certainty. Naval war almost never offers that, but enough confidence that multiple American launch platforms can work for the same tactical truth. Once the picture is stable, the strike planner starts doing ugly math. How far is the submarine from its firing basket? How long for a cruise missile on a sea-skimming route? How long for a faster weapon from a different axis? How long before carrier aircraft reach release range? How long can the enemy keep course before the solution goes stale? How much delay can the plan absorb if one launch platform has to reposition or one track gets reclassified? This is where time on target stops sounding cinematic and starts sounding like engineering. Phase 2. Force the enemy to defend every compass direction at once. Once the picture is good, the next step is geometry. A fleet air defense commander wants to mass radar energy and interceptor timing toward the most dangerous access. He wants a main raid, wants a predictable bearing. He wants enough sequence to preserve magazine depth. The American answer is to deny him that comfort. One submarine to the south, a destroyer pair to the east, carrier aircraft approaching from a wider arc, maybe another surface shooter outside the enemy's expected sector, maybe decoys, maybe electronic attack, maybe emissions control so the launch platforms themselves are harder to classify until the weapons are already outbound. This is not just about surprise, it's about forcing the defender to fracture his own attention. If an enemy cruiser sees all threats from one bearing, it can rotate illuminators, assign sectors, and create a disciplined firing plan. If the same cruiser suddenly has to account for threats descending into the battle space on staggered vectors, the calm disappears. Combat systems can be excellent and still get punished by geometry. And the US Navy has been building weapons that punish geometry. Naval News reported that Tomahawk Block 5 modernization improved navigation and communications, while the Maritime Strike Block 5A variant added a seeker for engaging moving targets at sea. That matters, because the old clean division between land attack cruise missile and naval strike missile has eroded. A weapon launched far from the target can now remain relevant deep into the engagement window if the kill chain stays connected. That is a nightmare for a fleet commander. He is no longer only defending against what he can see in his local horizon box, defending against weapons launched from ships and submarines far beyond that box. Time to arrive after the attackers used offboard sensing to shape the geometry. Then, there's the second problem: saturation through mismatch. Different weapons do not travel the same way. Some stay low. Some sprint faster. Some come from unexpected bearings. Some are there to kill. Some are there to force the defender to spend radar time, missiles, jamming effort, and command attention on the wrong problem. The point is not that every inbound has identical lethality. The point is all steal time, and time is the currency the defender cannot print. Phase 3. Make the salvo arrive as one tactical event. This is the heart of it. A time-on-target strike is built backwards from arrival, not from launch. That distinction is everything. The strike planner does not ask when can the USS whatever fire. He asks, at what second do I want the enemy fleet's defensive sequence to break? Then, he works backward from there. A submarine might need to launch first because its missile route is longer. A destroyer might launch later because its basket is closer. Carrier aircraft might hold outside release range until the last practical moment, then throw their weapons so the terminal phase overlaps with the sea-launched raid. Another platform may be tasked to arrive slightly early on purpose, not as the main killer, but as the opener that forces defensive radar emission, decoy launch, or a hurried course change. That course change matters, because fleets under missile attack stop behaving like parade formations. They turn, they separate, they mask one another's radars, they throw chaff, they accelerate, they break links. That movement can save them from a sloppy raid, but against a synchronized raid, frantic movement can make things worse. Now one escort drifts out of a mutual support position. Now a flagship exposes a cleaner flank. Now a point defense ship is busy with one axis when another axis becomes the real threat. Now the command circuit is handling too many urgent problems inside too few seconds. That is why erase is not as exaggerated as it sounds. The Navy does not need every hull to detonate simultaneously. It needs the enemy formation to suffer a systems collapse so fast that the surviving ships are no longer a fleet in any meaningful combat sense. One ship takes a mission kill, another loses radar, a third exhausts interceptors too early, a fourth turns away and breaks formation integrity. The command ship goes silent, helicopters cannot launch, data links get choked, the survivors are still floating, but the fleet as a fighting organism is finished. That is naval erasure, not theatrical annihilation. Operational dismemberment in one compressed strike window. Phase 4. Use the first impacts to blind the rest of the kill chain. People imagine the first explosions are the end. They are not. They are the handoff. The first impact should be chosen to make the follow-on hits easier. That can mean targeting the command ship, the best radar node, the outer air defense escort, or the ship carrying the most critical long-range interceptors. It can mean forcing the defender to radiate harder, reveal emitters on follow-on shots. It can mean hitting from a direction that turns surviving ships into poor mutual support partners. This is where distributed fires get vicious. Military.com's NIFC-CA reporting described the core idea of integrated fires plainly. Leverage future weapons and sensors to make the system more robust. In a fleet strike, that robustness means the raid should not die just because one shooter loses its best track, one platform has to go defensive. Another sensor can hold the picture, another shooter can exploit it. The kill web keeps breathing. That distributed approach matters even more in a cluttered maritime fight, because the enemy is trying to do the same thing in reverse. He is jamming, he is spoofing, he is maneuvering behind islands or weather, he is hiding lower signature ships near bigger signatures. He is hoping the Americans lose track purity long enough for the salvo to drift off schedule. So the US answer is to keep layering problem sets. If a destroyer uses long-range missiles to pressure the enemy's outer screen, a submarine might be assigned the cleaner angle on the flagship. If the carrier air wing sees the enemy formation bend north under pressure, another shooter may get a better terminal solution than the one originally expected to deliver the decisive hit. If one weapon family forces the defender low, another can arrive into the confusion. That is why the enemy commander's experience of a time-on-target strike will feel less like one attack and more like several separate disasters discovering each other at the same instant. And once the first impact lands, the Americans do not slow down to admire the work. They re-attack immediately. Phase 5. Finish the survivors before they rebuild the picture. A fleet that survives the first synchronized raid will try to do 3 things fast. Rebuild the air picture, re-establish command, resort the formation. The follow-on US attack is designed to deny all 3. That can mean aircraft rolling directly into battle damage assessment and retargeting. It can mean submarines shifting aim points as the surviving ships flee. It can mean destroyers holding additional missiles precisely because the first salvo was never meant to do all the work by itself. This is also where magazine logic matters. The Navy learned painful lessons in the Red Sea. Military.com reported that US warships fired 220 missiles over hundreds of engagements, and that the service had been forced to think harder about cost, replenishment, and which weapons should be used on which threats. That is a warning as much as a lesson. A serious fleet strike cannot be planned like a fireworks display. The raid has to kill the right nodes with the fewest high-value weapons necessary, because the war does not end after one afternoon. So a disciplined time-on-target strike is not just synchronized, it's economical in a cold military sense. The opening window should collapse the enemy's best defensive architecture so cheaper, closer, or more conventional follow-on attacks can finish what remains. That is where newer anti-ship weapons and mixed loadouts become important. Naval News noted the naval strike missile's growing role in Allied fleets and described how it brings a sea-skimming profile, passive terminal guidance, and maneuvering behavior meant to complicate shipboard defense. Whether the Navy is using Tomahawk in a maritime strike role, NSM on selected platforms, submarine-launched weapons, or carrier-delivered ordnance, the point is the same. Do not let the enemy recover into a second coherent battle. Kill the fleet before it becomes a fleet again. If this works, the aftermath is ugly and fast. The target admiral may still have hulls afloat. He may even still have missiles in some cells. But the formation is no longer doing what fleets are built to do: generate organized combat power across multiple ships. One ship is burning and no longer contributing sensors. Another is limping away under damage control. Another has expended too much of its defensive magazine to stand in. Another has broken radio discipline trying to reconstitute command. Helicopter decks may be fouled. Towed arrays may be useless. Radar faces may be offline. The force is now surviving, not fighting. That distinction decides campaigns. Because once the enemy fleet loses coherent air defense and command function, the US Navy gains room. Room for convoys. Room for carriers to operate with more freedom. Room for amphibious ships to approach later under better conditions. Room for submarines to hunt survivors instead of dodging intact screens. And the strategic shock lands immediately. A fleet that thought it could threaten a strait, seal an island chain, or contest sea control suddenly becomes a cautionary tale to every other commander in the theater. Merchant traffic reacts. Allied navies react. Political leadership reacts. The maritime map changes in hours, not weeks. That is why synchronized strikes matter more than the raw number of missiles fired. Volume is impressive. Compression is decisive. The next naval war will not reward the side with the prettiest order of battle slide. It will reward the side that can find, classify, relay, and strike faster than the other side can process what is happening. That is the real meaning of time on target at sea. Not just punctual missiles, decision speed warfare. A navy that can use Hawkeyes, submarines, destroyers, offboard sensors, and long-range weapons as one integrated firing problem is not merely shooting farther. It is attacking the enemy fleet's ability to remain a system. That matters in the Taiwan theater. It matters in the Philippine Sea. It matters in the Arabian Sea. It matters anywhere an enemy hopes geography, dispersion, or layered shipboard defense will buy enough time to survive the day. Because if the Americans can keep the kill web intact, the defender's favorite advantages start dying first. The radar horizon becomes less comforting, mutual support becomes less stable, dispersion becomes less safe, and every extra minute a fleet thought it owned gets stolen before the first missile even arrives. That is the part that should worry any rival navy. The US Navy doesn't need to sink every ship with the first volley. It just needs one synchronized window to turn a fleet into debris, confusion, and disconnected survivors. And after that, the rest is cleanup. A navy that can time the ocean like that is not just fighting harder, it's fighting smarter. If you want more tactical breakdowns like this, subscribe and stay locked in. There's a lot more coming.